No. The wing commander sat behind his desk, and his jaw actually physically fell open. In shock. In all his time in the Aeronautica Imperialis, he had not heard that word levelled at himself. It was unfathomable. The visiting attaché who stood at his right arm also double-took as the two of them just gaped at the lone pilot in front of them.
Pardon?
I said no. The commander and the visitor looked at one another in what was clearly confusion. For this was a simple assignment. A directive. An order. The pilot, Marnak Manata, was to be transferred to the new training wing set up in the wake of the First Tyrannic War. Of all of the pilots presently on this world, he was one of only a handful that had both fought and survived that conflict. That, and he had not been rendered down due to the shock of the event, as many had. When they could no longer fly, just huddled in corners and drooled, or constantly screamed at the horror that had shattered their minds, they were quickly disposed of. But Marnak had been solid. He had come out of it unscathed, is what the commander thought. And the rebuke was staggering. It flew in the face of everything the commander knew about Manata, everything that was expected of a loyal man under arms in service to the Imperium. I am confused, and that is not a natural state of being for me. I have given an order. I have given you the benefit and honour of informing you personally. I do not see that there is anything to discuss. And I said, no, I will not do it, said the pilot. This is insubordination. You know that? This is not a discussion. This is an FYI. I am ordering you to join this man and go with him to your new posting. I'm aware of the nature of the discussion, sir. You know I can have you placed in the penal regiment. You'd be flogged, your honour taken, your skin broken, your neck encased in a collar that can be detonated at the slightest delay in obedience. Boom. One press of a trigger. You be herded across minefields to clear them, forced to charge at enemy hardpoints that cannot be taken, just to distract the enemy. You will be nothing. You really want to throw away your career, your honour, your very life, just to spite me? Where does this come from, Manata? At least give me this before I decide your fate. Why? What you ask is for me to wake each morning to a role that will require me to remember those days, those nights. The pilot's eyes glazed as he continued. No longer making eye contact, he stared out of the window over the commander's shoulder. Every waking moment I will have to return, to try to dissect their tactics, their patterns, their strengths. You want me to enter a living hell, to never be able to escape those days, to never be able to escape those times. Every day I will look for their shadows. Every day I will hear their screams in my mind. Every day I will see what they are and what they do. So I say, no, I will not do it. The attaché spoke for the first time. Your knowledge is needed. They will come again. We know this. You defeated but one of their fleets. But one. There are many. Many more. And they will kill and consume until they are stopped. We face genocide, Mr. Manata. There is no other way of putting this. No other way it can be framed. If we do not learn how to stop the Tyranids, then the human race is lost. We will end. At this the pilot looked at the attaché deep in the eye. And I did my part. I fought. You know nothing of what you ask. Nothing. Ask the Ultramarines. Ask their auxiliaries. Ask anyone. But not me. The commander and the attaché both looked at each other. The commander knew he could not afford to lose his finest ace while embroiled in a huge campaign against War Face Splitter. He always took scalps from the greenskins whenever he flew. To have him taken to another facility was one thing. To be redeployed. But to bust him and whip him and ground him in front of the wing would be a blow they may not survive. The morale would crash. His men needed to feel they were the best. They faced numbers of 3 or 4 times their own whenever they took to the skies. This could not be public. But nor could he be refused like this. It would destroy his authority if it were to come out. And the wing commander was well aware of what would happen if the commissariat discerned that he had been refused. That Monarch Manata had been insubordinate and somehow survived. It would not stand. But the commander could not see a way out of his dire situation, and it was dire. The attaché then spoke again. This is a compartmentalized conversation, pilot. Please step outside while we discuss your fate. You will not speak to anyone while you are waiting. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Monarch Manata snapped a salute, twisted on his heel, slammed down his right foot, and then marched formally and perfectly out of the office. The two watched him as he marched to a chair in their view, then sat. But it was clear. As the commander did not know what to say, he simply continued to observe the pilot. And he saw that when nobody was present, that the pilot's eyes widened as he sat. His hands began to clench and unclench, and the commander knew he was there. He was reliving the war. Monarch Manata looked up at the darkening skies. His thunderbolt streamed through the air at its maximum tolerable height. He watched as the blackness above him moved, his eyes not able to make out the vessels so far away that he could never witness them. But in terms of the void, they were closing fast. It would be only hours before they made orbit. A Hive Fleet. Yet even before their main fleet arrived, the darkness did indeed move, for waves and waves of flying things were hurtling towards the planet. At first, Monarch thought that these were spores, and for the most part he was right. For the Tyranids were attacking all over the sector. It was a bloodbath. But some information had gotten out. Not much, but some. And from those reports, this is always how it started. The spores. Filling the skies, the spores. Blobs of goo, filled with Xenos terrors that would leap from the bursting spores like Astartes from a drop pod. When they were down, they would collect and then charge towards the nearest settlements and attack. But Monarch Manata realized that the reports had only been snatches of information, sneak peeks, not the full picture. As the flights of thunderbolts moved to engage, they had been told that every shell, every missile counted, that they would be culling undefended spores, trying to rip as many of them to pieces before they hit the earth. It sounded great. But this was clearly not the case. Not even close. As the fighters came in, many of the targets were indeed pods filled with evil attack beasts. When his wings shot them, bursting them, often deluges of smaller beasts would fall from them like rain. Just as the wings engaged close, they saw, to their horror, that a good chunk of the incoming were winged. These beings flew out at them, firing balls of corrosive acid that would melt a fighter in seconds. Missiles that could not be escaped, no matter the evasive maneuvers taken, no matter how talented the pilot. Manata watched as his colleagues were torn to pieces. Shiro was taken down with a score of the smaller ones on his wings, his fuselage, breaking into his cockpit. It was suicidal of them, so many annihilated by his weapons, but they dragged him down. Then Akira, Hirohito, and Yamato all went down in quick succession as huge beasts broke from the flocking minor Tyranids and scythed their thunderbolts in twain. Just with their wings, just with their claws. Monata rolled and fired, ducked, dived, and span. He was furious not to slay, not to bark his rage at them through his firepower, but to simply survive. It was a living nightmare, and it was one he swore he would never return to again willingly, this being the first time he had relived these moments in near a decade. Well, while awake. He could not stop the night terrors, but he now knew how to control them. The box he wished never to be opened had been laid bare by the conversation in the office. He now glared up at the window through which his officers clearly were gawping at him. Not that he could see them through the tinted glass, but he knew they spoke of him now. And with a shadow of the memory in his mind, the pilot made peace with his decision. He would not return to that time. Not in deed, not in memory. He would rather be busted down, whipped and clubbed, and beheaded than return to that time. For he knew the Tyranids would come. He always knew that. They were coming. And he wanted to be dead before it happened. Nothing could permanently stop them, the Tyranids. And they were coming. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the important factions, forces, and units of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And if you are a regular gentle listener, then I would ask that you check that you are still subscribed and have notifications on. If not, then do consider subscribing, as then you will not miss out on ongoing narratives, if that sort of thing appeals to you. And today, we are to take a look at the first waves of the Hive Fleets assault, the wings that blacken the skies of any world doomed by the advent of the Tyranids. Of course, I can only be talking of the many aerial beasts of the bugs, both magnificent and terrorizing in equal measure. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Skyswarm bioforms. Tyranid bioforms sweep across the sky in leather-winged clouds, casting flickering shadows across the terrified troops below. With a chorus of unnatural shrieks, they fold their wings and dive towards their prey, spitting caustic acid that scorches and blinds. Amidst the flock, larger shapes can be seen, true monsters of the air, with wings as vast as fighter craft. Gargoyles. Gargoyles are often the first wave of a Tyranid swarm to be seen in battle. Gargoyles are often the first wave of a Tyranid swarm to be seen in battle. They're agents of dismay, whose prime purpose is to sow terror and confusion amongst the enemy, keeping their prey disordered and off guard while the main body of the Tyranid assault arrives. Thus a Tyranid attack is preceded by the beating of thousands of membranous wings as gargoyle broods descend upon the foe, blotting out the sun and spitting death from their flesh borers. The sheer psychological impact of such an overwhelming aerial assault is enough to break all but the most grizzled soldiers. In truth, turning to run is the worst thing a warrior can do when faced by a sky swarm of gargoyles. These predatory beasts excel in picking off isolated, panicked targets, either blasting them apart with torrents of bioweapon fire, or snatching them into the air only to drop them to the hard ground with bone-shattering force. Physically, gargoyles strongly resemble the termagants from which they are derived, with compact but lithe bodies encased in a lightly armoured exoskeleton. They also display the same animal cunning, and instinctively assail the foe from an unexpected quarter whenever the situation allows. Winged maneuverability gives the Gargoyles a distinct advantage over the majority of opponents, who for the most part rely on technological assistance to fly. As a result, Gargoyles have earned a dread reputation, a legend that, in truth, far outstrips their physical threat. Wherever Gargoyles are abroad, the defenders look fearfully to the skies, for they know that every sky-born shadow could be a flock of Gargoyles about to attack. Those that face Gargoyles believe them to be skittish in nature, creatures that flee in the face of combat and instead prefer to fight at range. Indeed, a Gargoyle's leathery wings are easily damaged in close-quarters fighting, an unnecessary waste when the creatures are perfectly adapted at killing their prey from a distance whilst avoiding retaliation. On occasions when the Gargoyle's natural instincts are suppressed, they fight with all the desperate savagery of cornered beasts, entering a frenzied state that more than compensates for any perceived fragility. Gargoyles also spit a caustic venom that burns at skin. The Gargoyles instinctively aim for their prey's eyes, blinding their foe before tearing into them with barbed tails and talons, until either they or their prey are slain, or the hive mind relinquishes its control. A deliberate quirk of the Gargoyles' physical structure means that they can squeeze through gaps seemingly far too small to permit passage. Enemy troops and a Gargoyle attack have to be especially vigilant of any gap in the defenses that the creatures could possibly exploit. Be it an observation hatch, access portal, ventilation shaft, or even an incinerator chute. Given time, the Gargoyles will find their way in. Once inside, the Gargoyles lash out with every weapon at their disposal in a frenzied attempt to escape back into the open skies and unfurl their wings once more. Although Gargoyles may not display the same physical might as some of the larger Tyranid organisms, being trapped with one in a confined space is an invariably lethal experience. Harpies. Harpies are monstrous bioforms that fly with a deftness and agility unattainable by even the most sophisticated fighter craft. As they soar overhead, they rain clusters of living bombs onto prey worlds, whilst their forearms, which are melded with large bioweapons, spit death as they fly. Harpies appeared in the early stages of a Tyranid attack, working in concert with Gargoyles to drive prey creatures out into the open. However, though the two species share a similar goal, they are physically very different. Where the Gargoyle is very much akin to a winged termagant, the Harpy appears much closer in nature to a trigon. As with many of the larger Tyranid bioforms, the Harpy utilizes a wide array of weaponry, according to the particular tactical needs of the Hive Fleet. In addition to the bloated spore mine cysts on their undersides, and the bioweapons fused to their forearms, the rib cages of many Harpies conceal rows of barbed spines. These are typically fired as the Harpy flies over the foe, ripping through infantry formations below. However, the Harpy is most feared for the ear-splitting shriek that it makes as it dives for the kill. Such is the pitch and volume of this piercing noise that it is almost a weapon unto itself. It is excruciatingly painful to lesser forms, such as orcs and humans, and can even prove fatal to creatures with more highly developed senses, such as Eldari or the genetically enhanced space marines. Those that survive this cacophonous assault are left dizzied and disorientated, easy prey for the Harpy's razor-sharp talons. Perhaps due to its opportunistic nature, the Harpy tends to avoid protracted assaults, instead opting for strafing runs performed at the nadir of one of its swooping dives. This is not to say that the Harpy does not engage in bloody melee, but it rarely engages in such a contest unless the odds of victory are stacked in its favor. Accordingly, the Harpy's favored quarry is something ill-suited to fighting back. Light enemy vehicles are a particular favorite, as they lack the speed to escape and the capacity to offer any real threat to the Harpy at short range. Hive Crones. The Hive Crone is a flying monstrosity used by the Tyranids to establish air superiority over prey worlds. It is a creature perfectly adapted to aerial combat, able to wrestle enemy aircraft out of the skies as proficiently as any daredevil pilot at the controls of a sophisticated jet fighter. A clutch of parasitic tentaclids nestle underneath a Hive Crone's wings, latched on until they are launched at enemy aircraft. Upon leaving their host, these creatures speed through the air, homing in on their target with unerring accuracy. When these living missiles strike, they emit a massive bioelectric pulse that can cripple the target's electronics or stall their engines, leaving them without power or thrust and sending them into a fatal dive. But even without their impressive biomissiles to shoot its prey, a Hive Crone is still deadly, flying close enough to its quarry to tear through them with the bladed spurs protruding from its underside. Once all of its aerial prey has been eliminated, a Hive Crone then softens up the planet's ground-bound defenders, swooping over the heads of the enemy soldiery and drizzling hypercorrosive digestive fluids onto its victims. Before reaching a target planet, Hive Crones also protect bioships in their journeys through extragalactic space against attacks from enemy assault shuttles and bombercraft. In silence, a Hive Fleet's Crones glide through the inky darkness, ripping enemy vessels open to the cold vacuum. Perfectly designed for both atmospheric and zero-gravity flight, the agility of a Hive Crone can unsettle those fighter pilots more used to taking on conventional aircraft. Opponents must also beware the sheer quantity and variety of the creature's bioweapons. More than one Imperial ace has been taken out of the sky by the swipe of a Hive Crone's bone spur, having discounted the possibility of their target engaging with physical attacks. Hive Crones often use flocks of Gargoyles to screen their attacks against enemy aircraft, dropping out of the swarm of leathery bodies at the last moment to fall upon their prey in one decisive strike. At the Battle of St. Myrcelias, several wings of Valkyries were lost when the hive mind employed such tactics. The Hive Crone that came to be known as Bloodwing was responsible for no less than 13 confirmed kills during this engagement. Each marked a precision thrust of its wingtips through the cockpit of an Imperial fighter, impaling the pilot through his flight chair. These distinctive tactics have led to several aeronautical imperialist training facilities seeking out veteran pilots of the Tyrannic Wars to better tutor their pilots in combating these biological horrors. Unfortunately for the Imperium, such surviving experts are few and far between. Harridans. Harridans are monstrous creatures, likened to the flying drakes and wyverns or dragons of legend. They are the largest of any Tyranid capable of flight, soaring through a prey world skies on massive leathery wings. Though they lack the sheer speed of attack aircraft, it is a brave fool indeed who thinks them an easy target. Harridans can slice an aircraft apart with a single swipe of their massive talons, or blast them into clouds of superheated debris with precision volleys from their ventral biocannons. More impressive still is Harridan's endurance, for it can remain aloft indefinitely and need never land. Harridans act as brood mothers for the smaller Gargoyles, and their undersides rise with the teeming flocks. When the Harridan has transported its broods to their destination, the Gargoyles unlatch their claws and open their own membranous wings, resembling a dark cloud that descends to swallow the prey below. End quote. Now I have to admit that I have a smaller Tyranid force that I enjoy very much, yet do not have any of these incredible figures. For the flying Tyranids are a threat and horror that few things can compare to in all of the grim darkness of the far future. They lend to the overall aesthetic of the Hive Fleets in a way that I feel can only be matched by the more strange bioforms, the Venomthropes and the like, for although one might initially believe them to be semi-familiar, like a well-armed pterodactyl, this is simply not the case. They are strange and otherworldly, truly alien in their form, and this adds to the amazing fun of the striking range that is the Tyranids. Now I have to also admit that I am intensely excited for the planned reveal coming from Games Workshop only tomorrow, Saturday the 10th of July, as there has been talk of them shedding more details on the most troubling confrontation that is presently active in the lore. For alas, Inquisitor Cryptman may well have doomed the galaxy in his bid to save it, for he sent a tendril of Tyranids to the Orc Empire of Octarius, and since then, the Orcs and Tyranids have been waging a never-ending war of escalation. The Orcs gaining size and power as they are engaged in a constant war, their bread and butter, their life's blood. The Tyranids evolving and adapting not only to the Orc tactics, but their entire biology to meet the increasing power of the Orcs. And this diversity, this alteration, this evolution could well spill the doom of all. And no matter what comes out of that war, be it Tyranid or Orc, it could well be a threat the galaxy may well not survive. And tomorrow we get the lore from the horse's mouth itself. That's going to be on Twitch at 1800 hours GMT. So I very much hope you will join me at one of potentially the most nail-biting reveals that has happened in years. But I assure you, it will not be Orc or Tyranid players who are biting their nails. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to Tyranid flying beasts, their air force. If so, then please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.